الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on the last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and on all those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. The topic which I have been given this morning deals with terrorism, and it is connected with immigration and migration and the problems that currently face Gambians in particular. However, the topic of terrorism is probably not that relevant to the current situation here in the Gambia. We don't know of any refugees who have been to Europe and ended up in terrorist organizations. We don't know of any Gambians who went to Syria. Do we know of any Gambians? Went to Syria, died there with ISIS? No. Do we know of any Gambians that went to Afghanistan and fought with the Taliban? Even our neighbors, Boko Haram around the corner there in Nigeria, do we have any Gambians that have gone and joined them? No. So one might think that really this topic of terrorism is not really that relevant to the Gambia and young people here in the Gambia. However, as students pour out of the high schools of the Gambia, every year tens of thousands are graduating. And these tens of thousands who are graduating are, for the most part, not finding jobs, unable to continue their education. They end up in the streets, as street hawkers, or they end up, as partners for the tubabs, or some other form of corruption. This is the reality that we're living. But potentially, Boko Haram could arise here. All it takes is one person to have this idea in his head and start to gather youth, give them an alternative, tell them about jihad and the importance of jihad. And of course, jihad is mentioned all through the Quran. And there's so many hadiths about jihad. So, as young people, it may sound very exciting, very attractive. And if they're funded by agencies outside of Gambia or even within Gambia, whatever, it would not be surprising if such groups arose here also. If it can happen in Nigeria, if you could have civil war in Sierra Leone, which is 71% Muslim, these things can happen here too. The situation can go bad. So it is important for us to understand the principles and the concepts behind what we are now hearing as terrorism, promoted in the media, Donald Trump pumping it up, Putin talking about it. Even Erdogan is caught up in it. And it becomes the explanation for all the problems that people are faced with, Western societies as well as Eastern societies. And if you consider that in the East here, In India with 1 billion people, 250 million of them are Muslims. Dr. Zakir Naik, you've watched his Peace TV, right? You've all watched Peace TV. Dr. Zakir Naik is labeled as the biggest terrorist in India. He is not even able to remain in India. He can't live in India anymore. If he goes to India, he will be jailed forever. They will put him in jail and throw away the key. All of his centers have been shut down. Have you ever heard a word from any of Dr. Zakir's lectures in which he called people to violence? Absolutely not. But because of the fact that he is educating Muslims, bringing a consciousness to Muslims, causing Muslims to rethink and to take another approach, they look at him as a threat. And the easiest way to crush a threat is to label it terrorist and then crush it physically. So we have to understand that this label of terrorism that we are hearing today is connected really with the overall accusation of Muslims as being violent. Few years back, the big word that they were using was jihad. That was the bad word. Jihad. And jihad became the basis for accusing Muslims of spreading Islam through violence. That Islam was a violent religion. So that this is what's behind all of this. To distort the image of Islam. And this image is an ancient image. It's not something which just came up recently. Though Muslims were not much in the newspapers, etc., I know myself, before I became a Muslim, my earliest recollections of Islam, or what could be called Islam, was this image of an Arab riding in off the desert on his camel, his headscarf flying in the wind. He has a curved sword in one hand, and he has a Quran in the other hand. This is the image. Wild-looking man. I never heard about Islam. I didn't know what Islam was, but that was the image that I got, of Arab, Islam, Muslim. That was the image. And of course, the stories in the West of the Crusades, the way, of course, the Crusades is presented is not of crusaders coming into the East, with swords in one hand and the Bible in the other hand. They don't present it that way. No, they're presented as coming to liberate Palestine from the infidels. That's the Muslims who were desecrating this area, killing Christians, which were lies. Just stories made up. They wanted to capture Palestine. There were political reasons, there were economic reasons, all kinds of reasons behind it, but they cloaked it in the Crusades for Christ. Right? So, of course, in their books, in their history books, in the stories, they tell it, this was the holy war, right? They fought for God. And we, the Muslims, were fighting for the devil, right? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in a well-known writing by Dante called Dante's Inferno, he is depicted as one of the idols in the lowest levels of the hellfire. Muhammad, this idol. This was the idol of the Muslims or the Musulmans. They had all kinds of names for us. So, this was an impression. They promoted this idea of Muslims spreading Islam through violence. Even though in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 256, Allah says there very clearly, لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي. There should be no compulsion in religion or in the acceptance of religion. The right path has become clear from the wrong. So this has been the basic principle governing Muslims from the earliest of times, that nobody could be forced to become Muslim. Of course, in Mecca, people chose Islam. Nobody was going to be forced because they were opposing Islam directly. In Medina, when Islam spread, how did Islam spread? Did the early Muslims of Medina force Islam on the remainder of the population? No, they didn't. There was no force involved here. So this is an image which has been created. And in order to support that image, they took the principle of jihad and they translated it and expressed it as the Muslim holy war. Realities, of course, in Islam, we have no holy wars. War is not considered to be holy. War, in and of itself, is not considered to be holy. There is struggle. It can be righteous or unrighteous. But we don't have any term like that in the Islamic teachings which refer to what may be called a holy war. The fact of the matter is that jihad, the real meaning of jihad, is never presented, because it's not going to sell newspapers, magazines. It's not going to earn ad space on Fox News or whatever. It's not what they want to hear. People want to hear violence. They want to hear madness. Crazy Muslims. That's what makes the news. Reality of the term jihad, of course, as most of you know, is that it means to struggle. Jihad means to struggle. And even Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had said, the person who performs the ultimate jihad is he who struggles against his own desires for the sake of Allah. Struggling against one's own desires, that's the lower desires, the evil desires, struggling against it, that is the ultimate jihad. Because if we haven't overcome those desires internally, then we cannot overcome them externally. So, in Islam, we know that jihad can be with one's tongue, or it can be with the pen, and this may be far more effective than military jihad. But yes, fighting on the battlefield is also a form of jihad, whether it is in defense of Muslim property, Muslim life, community, or whether it is in order to liberate other peoples who may not be Muslims, but peoples who are oppressed. We don't want to say that jihad is only defensive. It may be offensive where it involves liberating other peoples. And that's what happened, for example, in Spain. Muslims were invited into Spain to break the shackles that had been put on the peoples of Spain. They were in such a state of oppression. They welcomed Muslims into the country, and that's why Muslims were able to take over the whole of Spain in a very short period of time, because they came as liberators. And when they came, whether it was there or whether it was toppling the Roman Empire in Egypt, North Africa, or whether it's in Palestine, this region, they did not force the population to become Muslims. Eventually, all of these populations did become Muslim. And people we know today as Arabs, they weren't Arabs. They learned Arabic. It became their language. And the culture connected with it, they also accepted. And Islam. But Egyptians, for the most part, were not Arabs. Libyans, Algerians, Moroccans, who we now know we call them Arabs, they were not really Arabs. But it became their culture, their language, just as it did in the Sudan. And the idea of Islam being a violent religion is, as I said, not only is it false, it goes against the fundamental teachings in Islam about life. That Allah is the creator of life, He's the creator of this world, and He created the life which He put into this world. Whether the life is a human life, or whether it is a plant life, or an animal life, all of it has value, and Islam seeks to protect it. Unless there is harm, where a life may be taken to protect ourselves from harm, or there is need for food, we kill certain animals to eat them, we benefit from them in different ways. They were created for us. But slaughter of animals for sport, this is something forbidden in Islam. Completely forbidden. Western civilization, they engaged in it. They're the ones who came to Africa, on safaris with their big guns, shooting down the elephants and the rhinoceroses and, killing these animals left and right. They're the ones who did it. And then after they killed off most of the animals, then they told the Africans who were eating some of those animals, stop eating them. We have to protect them now. These are protected species, they're near extinction, please stop, And they will spend millions to preserve these animals now and deny the people who need that money more. Instead of giving it to help uplift the population, they're giving it to preserve animals that they were killing like flies, 100 years before. So it is a very skillful propaganda which is promoted, but reality is that Islam seeks to protect life. We are protectors of life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in the 5th chapter, verse 32, من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا. Anyone who killed another except in retaliation or for major corruption in the land, it is as if he has killed the whole of humankind. That is the position of Islam concerning it. So this image which has been created of Muslims being bloodthirsty thugs who are chopping off heads and blowing up people left and right, this is a distortion in order to keep Islam down. That's what it is. What's behind it all is to keep Islam from rising. We see it getting more and more intense with every decade. Back in the 70s, early 70s, it was not existent. Late 70s, it started to show its head. The 80s, it's getting more and more. The 90s, more and more. 21st century, now it's all up. Everywhere we turn, it's at us. The question is, why? Because the awareness of Islam is increasing. They don't want it to increase. Because with its increase, then their ability to exploit the Muslim nations is limited. Terminated or limited. They can't keep on doing what they were doing for the last 500 years. It has come to an end. They see the end. And they want to delay that end. So, this is the methodology which they use to create the image of a violent Muslim world. They're the ones who are bringing the violence, attacking mostly Muslim countries. Whether it's in Afghanistan, it's in Iraq, or various parts of the Muslim world, coming under attack from the West. Of course, they do it in a subtle way where it becomes like revolt within the countries. You know, somebody's inviting them in. You know, they're not openly promoting that, but they are practically doing it. So, in order to further distort the image of Islam, they promote the idea that Islam was spread by the sword. That same image that we spoke about. But if we look at history, of course, it says something else. Muslims ruled Spain for 700 years. Did all Spaniards become Muslims? No. A large percentage did, but the majority did not. And Muslims ruled that country for 700 years. When the Christians came in, Ferdinand and Isabella coming back from France, when they came in with the support of the French and so on and so on, they took over, what did they do? Ethnic cleansing. They chased every Muslim out of Spain. Not a single Muslim who was openly Muslim would be allowed to stay in Spain. This is the first time in history that a cleansing like that had ever taken place. And that was the Christians. That wasn't the Muslims. Muslims ruled India for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. Did all Indians become Muslims? No, we know not. You know, because the situation of Dr. Zakir Naik is clear evidence that they're definitely not. Huh? And the majority remained Hindu. But 40% of them did become Muslims. That 40% of them right now means 600 million Muslims. You're not talking about small numbers now. 600 million Muslims. You might say, but no, in India it's only 200 plus million. India, 200 plus million. Pakistan, 200 million. Bangladesh, 200 million, because all of that was India. The British divided it up so that the Muslim areas would be separated out of the main body of India so they could control that area better, because the Muslims were just a problem for them. So divide them up, east and west, and of course, they were able to control that area. But reality, you put all the people who were the Indians, who were the people of India. It was Pakistan, Bangladesh, and what we now call India together. And there's 600 million Muslims there. That's 40%. 800 million going on to 1 billion Hindus, but 600 million Muslims, and they are also increasing steadily. So, in spite of 1,000 years of Muslim rule, the population was not forced to become Muslims. If we were forcing people by the sword, there would not have remained a single Hindu in India. Now you know of Buddhism. You've heard of Buddhism, right? Now, where did Buddhism begin? It began in India. Buddha was a Hindu. Now, you will not find Buddhism in India. It's not strange. Buddhism is in Ceylon, became Sri Lanka. It's in Sri Lanka. It's in India. It's in China. It's in Japan. It was in Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia. All these areas are Buddhist. What happened? They chased every last Buddhist out of India. They didn't allow Buddhism to thrive or spread in India. No chance. So that is the Hindu way. And right now, of course, the number of Muslims that are there is just too much for them to drive them all out. So what they do instead is to just try to control, to crush, to prevent as much as they can Islam from rising in the country. But reality, clear reality is that Islam remains, according to all research bodies, the fastest growing religion in the world. In spite of all of their efforts, in spite of all the distortions and terrorism and all this kind of thing, look at Trump's recent efforts, banning Muslims from coming into America. What did he do instead? He popularized Islam on a scale that was, way higher than the years before. So even you find some Americans, because they felt it was against the principles of America, respecting people's religions and that. So in defense, because they like to do that, in defense, some of the women were putting on hijabs and saying, "We are Muslims." Like, anytime they find a clause, they always say, "We are," whatever that is, right? So they say, "We are Muslims," and they're not Muslims, right? But they're just, in support of Muslims. So, of course, you see all the demonstrations going on, the cities, the marches. You see now, placards with women in hijab. This is something you didn't see that before. On a scale now it's huge, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So what is happening is, the same time, is that people, whilst they're doing all of this, they're still curious. So they're going to Islamic centers and can you tell us something about Islam? We're saying we're this, and give us some more information about this Islam. And they're finding about it, and more people are accepting Islam. So, alhamdulillah, even from way back in the 90s, they did studies in terms of the rate of conversion in America, and they said between 300 and 400 people were accepting Islam in America every day. Between 300 and 400 people every day. And this is, we know, globally, the biggest enemy of Islam. Even though people say we're not, the people on top say we're not enemies of Islam, we're not against Islam and so on, but actions speak louder than words. So this is the reality with regards to these labels, terrorism, etc. And though Muslims were given the permission to defend themselves, of course Christianity likes to present itself as the religion that turns the other cheek, right? Jesus, had supposedly said that if somebody slaps you on one cheek, you turn the other cheek, let them slap you there too. So it's like you don't fight back. But that's something which is in the New Testament of the Bible. But is that the reality? Is that the reality of the Christian civilization of the West? No. It's been a very violent, forcing Christianity down the throats of people, massacring, the Indians. They estimated the number of Indians who were in America, in the U.S. before the European Christians came, to be approximately 10 million Indians. Today, there is less than 2 million Indians in America. Imagine that. There was 10 million when they came. 500 years have passed, and their numbers are just less than 2 million. It means that you have decimated a society. You have destroyed and killed people on a scale which is unimaginable. We complain as people of African heritage, of what happened to Africans who were taken from here to America. No doubt, millions died. But what happened to the original inhabitants of America is beyond imagination. It is beyond imagination. There's a book, since you are students, many of you, etc., there's a book written by the author whose name is D. Brown. The book is called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. This is a book, if you just want to know the history of what happened to the Indians in America, that book outlines that history. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. by D. Brown, D-E-E, Brown, B-R-O-W-N. Anyway, that's the reality. This is the real history of what actually took place. Now, in order to defend this type of attack on Islam, what the West likes to do is to take verses from the Quran to promote that Muslims are in fact violent people. They like to do that. So they will take verses at random in different places of the Quran, and actually in the Bible it's far, far worse than anything that they've ever said about Islam. They will take verses like this one in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 191, وَقْتُلُوهُمْ حَيْثُ ثَقِفْتُمُوهُمْ. Kill them, that's the disbelievers, wherever you find them. Kill them wherever you find them. That sounds terrible. You know, look at this holy book. And that's why you have some politicians in Europe, you know, who seek to ban the Quran, to ban it as a book of violence, etc., etc. Okay? So kill them wherever you find them. The verse before it, 190, Allah says there, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Fight those for the sake of Allah who fight against you. For the sake of Allah, you should fight those who fight against you. It doesn't say go kill anybody you find. It says fight those who fight against you. If you have been attacked there, and Allah goes on to say, but do not exceed the limits. Do not exceed the limits. What are the limits? The limits which Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, you know, you don't kill women and children, you don't kill people who are in churches and synagogues and things like this. You know, you have limits. You just can't go and kill anybody you feel like. There's people on the battlefield. People who are fighting against you, you can fight against them. And they don't mention that second part, right? They only mention the first part. And this is their methodology, to distort the image of Islam. But of course, to be honest, we have contributed to this misconception through the groups that have come up, whether they are ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, Shabab, Taliban, Abu Sayyaf, they got no end of them. And in many cases, there are secret service agencies, you know, that have in fact set them up. You know, government secret services, or external or internal, who have set them up. But there are Muslims still who are representing these various groups. And of course, they are distorting the true teachings of Islam in their actions. You know, ISIS, of course, has been the most prominent example in our most recent time, cutting the heads of people publicly on public television. You know, people who even are Muslims, people who declare their Islam, converts to Islam, heads cut off in front of everybody, simply because they're American. And so in that sense, we have to accept some of the blame. You know, we cannot just put it all on them. We have played our part. You know, ignorant Muslims being caught up in these different groups like Boko Haram, etc., committing all kinds of atrocities, things which are unimaginable, putting bombs in marketplaces. People are buying and selling their stuff. You put a bomb there and blow people up. You know, this is something unimaginable. Can human beings actually do this? That's why some brothers said, these guys are kafirs. You know, we just want to label them all as disbelievers. That's the only way we can accept it, that these people don't believe in Allah. They couldn't believe in Allah and do this. But reality is that, yes, they are Muslims. We cannot say they're not Muslims unless they say they're not Muslims. We can say their actions are not the actions of Islam and Muslims, but we can't really say they are not Muslims. They are misguided Muslims. And it's not the first time and it won't be the last time. We had from the time of the righteous caliphs, some of the best generation. In the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib, you had the Khawarij that broke off and massacred Muslims then, in the name of Islam, declaring other Muslims to be kafirs, declaring Ali ibn Abi Talib to be a kafir. So these things, Shaitan is busy. In every generation, he will find individuals who will work with him and distort the image of Islam and spread chaos in the Muslim world in order to hamper the development of Islam. The last point I'd like to make before closing is concerning the term terrorism. Concerning the term terrorism. The literal meaning in the dictionary is to strike fear in the hearts of others through certain actions. And in a lecture which Dr. Zakir Naik gave way back in the 90s, he did a play on words in which he said, Muslims enjoin the good and prohibit the evil. So in our society, we will make the evil people fearful. The thieves, we cut off their head. The murderers will execute them. So we will put fear in them. We will terrorize them. So on the basis of that, every Muslim should be a terrorist. Now, what they did, they just took that statement that he said in a particular context, and they say, here is Dr. Zakir Naik saying every Muslim should be a terrorist. But, of course, we understand what has happened, how it has been manipulated. In those days, people were not as sensitive about wording and what you say, so we would say today it would be a big mistake. Now, people who are speaking on behalf of Islam have to be very careful with their words. They have to judge the possible implications that each word can say. You have to be very careful. Because whatever you said is being recorded, it's up on the YouTube or whatever, they can pull this out of context and there you are. So very, very dangerous now for Muslim speakers globally. Reality is that terrorism, as it is defined by the American government, is the threat or use of violence to advance a political cause by individuals or groups, whether acting for or in opposition to established government authority, when such actions are intended to shock, stun, or intimidate a target group wider than the immediate victims. This is the definition given by the American government of terrorism. However, problem with that is that all of the wars of liberation can be described that way. Whether it's the American War of Independence, didn't they shock people with their violence? Didn't they blow things up? And, were they not opposing the British rule of it? All of that. The French Revolution, you can describe it the same way. So this term terrorism, as they say, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Right? If you were with the British during the American War of Independence, the Americans who were fighting were the terrorists. And if you were with the Americans fighting against the British, then the British were the terrorists. So, in our times though, the state of Israel, which was established by Jewish terrorism, Zionist terrorism, the main group which was behind the early taking of Muslim lands, chasing the Palestinians out of their homes, fleeing into refugee camps, etc. They were known as the Stern Gang. And virtually all of the first premiers of Palestine were from that gang, members of that gang. So this, though we have the Muslim terrorist label being used for Muslims, terrorism was in place all over Europe. You know, Hitler was called a bad, man. He was not, nobody called him a Christian terrorist because he was a Christian. He was a Christian. And did he strike terror in the rest of the world? He sure did. But nobody called him a Christian terrorist. The IRA, Irish Republican Army, when they were fighting against the British to get their, ruled free North Ireland, which the British didn't want to let go, they were bombing, blowing up things here, there, and everywhere. Were they called Christian terrorists? No. They were just terrorists. And in Oklahoma, Timothy McVeigh, when he blew up the federal building, killing 168 people, and he was a fundamentalist Christian, did they call him a Christian terrorist? No, he was just a terrorist. So this is the game that is played in the media, where whenever any Muslim does anything wrong, he becomes a Muslim terrorist. He's a Muslim thief. He's a Muslim murderer. Whatever. It's always Muslim has to be stuck on there. And that is the image which has been created in the media. And this is something the media has agreed upon everywhere. They repeat that same process over and over again. The last point to make, and the other one was supposed to be the last, but there's this point which we should be clear on, because I don't want you to go away without knowing this, is that suicide bombing, because this is the next thing that's connected up to terrorism and jihad, is suicide bombing. That suicide is fundamentally prohibited in Islam. Even though it may be people are justifying it. ISIS right now, they're using it all the time. Boko Haram is using it. Women strapping bombs around themselves, going into market and blowing themselves up. Reality is that suicide is forbidden in Islam. Surah An-Nisa verse 29, Allah says there what? وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُمْ رَحِيمًا. Do not kill yourselves. Indeed, Allah is kind to you. Whatever situation you find yourself in, there's not justification for killing yourself. Allah has been kind to you. He has been merciful in your life. You just need to find it. You just need to be patient. Don't kill yourself. And the Prophet ﷺ had said, whoever throws himself down from a mountain and kills himself will be in the hellfire, throwing himself down therein forever and ever. And whoever takes poison and kills himself, his poison will be in his hand and he will be sipping on it in the hellfire forever and ever. Whoever kills himself with a piece of iron, like a knife or an axe or whatever, that piece of iron will be in his hand and he will be stabbing himself in his stomach with it in the fire forever and ever. And another, that is in Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari. And there's another hadith from Jundub ibn Abdullah in which he quoted the Prophet ﷺ as saying, anyone among you or among those who came before you, there was a man who was wounded and he panicked. So he took a knife and cut his hand with it, cut his wrist, and the blood did not stop flowing until he died. Allah said, my slave hastened to bring about his demise. I have forbidden paradise to him. So this idea that you blow yourself up and you're going to go to paradise and get all the hur al-ain, this is nonsense. You do that, you are assigning yourself to hell. That is the reality of the actual teachings of Islam. I just wanted to say that as the last point because this becomes a big issue today. It's used by all of the terrorist groups, who are committing terrorism in the name of jihad and Islam. So, barakallahu fikum. I'll stop here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
Seeking knowledge and obligation made easy. Thought about studying for a long time? Tuition fees keeping you from actually starting? Islamic Online University has led a revolution in online learning. The world's first tuition-free degree, BA in Islamic Studies. Access the knowledge, any place, anytime, anywhere. It just doesn't get any easier than that. Classes, texts, assignments, completely online. Set your own schedule for the semester. No overseas travel required for the exams. Subjects taught by qualified English-speaking scholars. Weekly live sessions and virtual classrooms. With curricula based on those in Al Medina University in Saudi Arabia, Al Azhar University in Cairo, and other reputable institutions around the world. Why wait any longer? You pay just a symbolic registration fee and are ready to begin the adventure of higher education. The most diverse student body of any university in the world. 130,000 plus registered students from 217 countries. Log in to the website for more details. www.islamiconlineuniversity.com